Hey, First United Methodist family, Pastor Shannon here with our weekly update. Well, this past Sunday, we concluded our sermon series on signs and wonders as we looked at the miracle of how Jesus raised Lazarus back from the dead. Now, the title of the sermon, and also it was the title of the chapter of the book, Signs and Wonders, was Taking Death Seriously. And it's kind of a bummer of a sermon as we learn to look death straight in the eye without flinching. But the whole idea is that we can't really truly celebrate what resurrection means until we take death seriously. We can't get to Easter Sunday until we get through Jesus' crucifixion on Good Friday. But as with many of my sermons, there's a lot more that I wanted to say that I didn't have enough time to put in my sermon. So I thought I'd touch a little bit more on one aspect of the story of Jesus raising Lazarus back to life. So, as we read in this story, this is in the final days and weeks of before Jesus' own death and resurrection. And at this point, both he and his disciples, they're starting to see the writing on the wall, that things are getting a little hairy for Jesus. Jesus had made a lot of people mad at this point. Tensions are running really high. And because of that, Jesus' disciples in John 11:8, they tried to dissuade Jesus from going to the town of Bethany, where Lazarus and his sisters, Mary and Martha, lived. They said, "Rabbi, the Jewish opposition wants to stone you, but here you are, you want to go back." Now, the sisters lived in Bethany, which is about 2 miles from Jerusalem, and Jerusalem was really the seat of religious and political power of Israel of that day. And so, in that city, in that town of Jerusalem, Jesus was kind of like public enemy number one. And Jesus' disciples were saying, "Don't go back there, you're going to get yourself killed." They knew that things were really tense for Jesus. But of course, Jesus is undeterred. He says, "I must go to Lazarus. I must go to Bethany." And we know the rest of the story that he raises Lazarus back to life. We read this really interesting quote in verse 11 where Thomas says to the other disciples, "Well, let's go too so that we may die with Jesus." They were really taking these threats about Jesus' death seriously, knowing that it would likely mean their own deaths as well. And then at the very end of the story, after Lazarus has been raised from the dead, we have this really interesting passage in John 11:45 through 46, where it says that many of the Jews, therefore, had came to see what Jesus did and believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So Jesus was a threat to the people in religious power and political authority. I mean, like, who needs a high priest when you have someone that's able to raise people from the dead? Who needs a Roman governor when you have someone that's able to perform these great miracles? So verse 53 tells us that the religious leaders from that day on, they plotted to kill Jesus. So we have this really celebratory occasion of Lazarus being raised back to life, but at the same time, it was one of those factors that ultimately led to Jesus' own death. Now, as a pastor, I sometimes get asked the question, did Jesus have to die? Surely God, who's all powerful, could find another way to provide for our salvation, to save us from our sins that didn't lead to Jesus' death. But in a sense, Jesus had to die. There was no other way that his life was going to end except in death. Because if you threaten power long enough, if you upset the status quo for long enough, the powers will begin to fight back. And so that's actually what we're going to talk about this Sunday as we celebrate both Palm Sunday and Passion Sunday. Jesus has this triumphal entry into Jerusalem, and it's kind of like the last straw for the people in charge. And they're going to finally find a way to get back at Jesus. So I really look forward to celebrating Palm Sunday, Passion Sunday with you all this Sunday. Don't forget, it's also that afternoon we have our marvelous Methodist Mission scavenger hunt. So it's not just for kids, it's not just for families. Everyone is welcome. We'll put you on a team and we'll do a citywide scavenger hunt at 3:30, and then we'll meet back at the church for pizza afterwards. So until Sunday, have a great week.